and dispatch tells drivers just to let them ride free. The drivers are tired of DCTA putting drivers in the middle. You either have standards or you don't. In addition, Officer Langley needs to start riding bus route 7 and 3 and quit riding the empty trains. Whatever is decided, the mask wearing is mandatory, and that should be made clear by DCTA publicly. The bus operation is an essential service. It is not convenient, nor is it frequent, but we are providing essential services. If Washington refuses to extend help to the unemployed and to cities and towns and state governments, we could be looking at 20 million new homeless, cars repossessed, and homes foreclosed. The bus service will be the only thing left standing for these people. We will know more by the end of August, so we're asking that this item be placed and acted on by the August meeting. Thank you, Jim Owen. So that concludes the part of the agenda on public comment. The next item on the agenda is the consent agenda, which includes the approval of the minutes from the May 28th, 20 board meeting. If there are no corrections to the amendment, to the minutes, then they'll stand approved as prepared. Are there any corrections? Thank you, they're approved. The next item on the agenda is—
I'm sorry, Vice Chair.
Need to move to approve?
I did it by unanimous consent. That's why I said if there's no objection, the minutes will stand approved as prepared.
Okay.
The next item is the review of the monthly financial statements for the fiscal year 2020, year to date, June 2020.
Yes, the financial statements are included in the packet on pages 10 and 11. This shows the change in net position as well as the statement of net position for the month ended June 30, 2020. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Are there any questions regarding the financial statement? There being none, then we will move to the next item. This is scheduled for a budget workshop today. Turn that over to staff.
Thank you. So the DCTA board had their budget workshop last month, and in that budget workshop, the NTMC budget was defined. The DCTA board is set to approve the budget in September, and the information that will be shared with you today is what is currently going to be included in the DCTA budget for approval in September. So this will give an opportunity for the NTMC board members to ask any questions of the information that is going to be included in the DCTA budget. And I'm going to turn it over to Marissa to begin reviewing through that information.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So just to briefly explain kind of the process, the DCTA board holds their budget workshop prior to the NTMC budget workshop. We determine what service levels are being requested by DCTA that need to be filled with personnel by NTMC. And so that's why historically we do the DCTA budget workshop first and then the NTMC budget workshop. If we can move to the next slide. This just shows a brief calendar of the process overall. Typically, the DCTA board will have a strategic planning session where they determine service levels for the next fiscal year. And then DCTA staff prepares and reviews internally the budget through the ILA between DCTA and NTMC. DCTA assists in budget preparation for NTMC, again, based on the service levels as defined. We present the NTMC budget. We're presenting that this month in July as a budget workshop. In August, there is a formal budget presentation and public hearing that DCTA conducts. It includes the NTMC funding portion as well. Then in September, both the DCTA board and the NTMC board will be asked to adopt the respective budgets for the next fiscal year. Throughout the year, obviously, We're working on budget maintenance, presenting financials to the board that show any monthly budget to actual variances. And then once the budget is adopted by both DCTA staff also submits our budget document to GFOA, which again does include the NTMC funding as well, since NTMC is an LGC created under DCTA. On the next slide, just a quick agenda. We'll go through the change in net position, operating expenses. Nicole will go over in detail the bus operations portion of the, or the bus operations expenses. And then we'll open it up to any questions, or we're happy for you to ask questions as we go along. On the next slide, there were some major changes that were incorporated into the FY21 budget due to COVID-19 and the reduction in ridership. As you all know, DCTA requested a reduced service level earlier this spring in response to the reduced ridership, just to help reduce expenses. And so those service levels are assumed to remain steady going into the FY21 budget. On the next slide, the budget reduction measures that have already been taken in response, in addition to the reduced service levels, we did also reduce staffing at NTMC. There were furloughs put into place in March through June, and then a permanent reduction in force that was effective June 15th, again, in response to that reduced service level. Additionally, we reviewed all department expenses, not only staffing, but all other expenses to determine what other non-essential expenses could be reduced to reduce the overall budget during this time. On the next slide, we can go one more. The change in net position is shown on page 12 in your packets. Again, just as far as the structure goes, NTMC is an LGC created by DCTA. And so DCTA staff prepares both the DCTA and the NTMC budgets. Bus operations expenses are included in both the DCTA budget and the NTMC budget, depending on whether they are related to DCTA assets or NTMC personnel. So NTMC as an employer, all of those costs associated with their personnel, so salary and benefits, recruiting costs, payroll processing, workers' comp, all of those expenses are included in the NTMC budget. And then expenses related to DCTA assets, the vehicles, facilities, et cetera, are all included in the DCTA budget. On the next slide, we've just shown a snapshot of the change in net position. Again, that is included on page 12 in the packet. On page 13, there is a detail by department that shows each line item of the budget by expense account, as well as by department, so you can see the various departments that make up the NTMC budget and how those are broken down. And then on pages 14 and 15, there are detailed line item budgets for the outsourced services and charges, as well as employee development. Historically, those are two of the lines that we get a lot of questions about, as far as what kind of things are in professional services, or what kinds of expenses are we including in employee development. So we've included that detail on pages 14 and 15 to provide a little additional information as far as that goes. Are there any questions thus far?
I just have a couple. Just one is this will go before, this has to go through public engagement, and then of course the DCTA board will have a chance to weigh in and discuss, correct?
So that the DCTA budget was held in June, We reviewed both DCTA expenses and NTMC expenses, since DCTA funds all portions of that. Yes, DCTA conducts the public hearing that includes both the DCTA and NTMC budgets, and that is scheduled for the August board meeting.
Right. So they have to still talk and weigh in and listen and all that good stuff. Then the other question is, I mean, and this is, you don't have a crystal ball, I know that, but do you anticipate, even though this budget may be adopted, there may be a few tweaks, do you anticipate probably even some more changes, perhaps even decreases based on the fact of how long this COVID situation will go?
And I'm happy to answer that. This is Nicole. I don't think that we'll see any decreases. I think if anything, we'll see some slight increases that will take place as we look at some possible new service delivery modes, like adding an on-demand service component to things. It might not, it might change the NTMC budget, since the NTMC budget is just staffing. It all depends on if NTMC staff is the one operating that on-demand service, or if we go with a turnkey solution. But I would not anticipate any further reductions, because we're already running a pretty lean service.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
My question is, year to date, what has been the reduction in ridership?
Do you have that number, Nicole, for the bus side?
I believe that we have a slide in this presentation that shows, so it's actually the very next slide.
There it is.
What, page 16? Okay.
Whew.
The next slide, we have shown pre-COVID in FY20, we were starting to see some slight increases in ridership in some of our zone service areas. And so obviously in the second half of FY20, we're assuming decreased ridership, basically sustained, and then into FY21, assuming a continued reduction in ridership, mainly only those essential trips, employees that are using it to commute to work and that sort of thing.
Brandy, can you go ahead and change to the next slide so they can look at the, oh, I thought it was the ridership. Sorry, go back. And Richard, that's an excellent question. And we are constantly monitoring what school districts are doing, what the governor is doing, the state, county, all the different levels of government. Clearly, when there is a shelter, the stay-at-home order clearly affected our ridership. And then with the shutdown of restaurants and bars, that impacted our ridership. We are seeing a slight increase in bus service when they opened up the restaurants and the bars. So there's a slight increase in bus.
I would say a slight increase from the major dips due to COVID.
Yes.
Yeah.
So it's all relative, but it is still significantly low. And
I would say overall we're seeing on fixed route at least a 40% decline in ridership, and that's the way that we budgeted for FY21. And on access service, we've budgeted a 20% decrease. And that's the reason that the decrease in access is less than fixed route, is because access is still for a lot of the essential trips, so folks that are going to the doctor. But ridership has definitely seen a major dip.
Okay, so that's kind of what I was observing, about a 40% drop. But our budget is just going from like 8.7 million down to 7.2 million. So I was trying to understand, with that dramatic drop, why would the operating expenses not drop more significantly?
Well, a lot of our operating expenses are based on like wages and benefits specifically allocated to the UNT service. And the UNT service only saw about like a 25 to 30% drop in service overall. And so you'll see that although the fixed route service had about a 40% decrease, the UNT service did not. And so that drives our service hours as well as our employee costs. And the two of those combined is what drives the overall cost of service.
And it's important to note too, you know, as Nicole mentioned, the costs are mainly related to or correlated with our service hours. And so ridership may have dropped more significantly. We have reduced service hours, but we are still running service. And so for every service hour where historically we may have had, you know, 10 people on a bus in a given period of time, now we might have 1 or 2. And so the costs per service hour remain somewhat constant because we still need a driver no matter how many people are on the bus, but we're just seeing a much lower ridership during those service hours because of the number of people that are staying at home or telecommuting, et cetera.
All righty. Thank you.
On the next slide, we have a staffing level overview by department showing the number of FTEs in each department. And we've shown this for FY19 through FY21. The primary change is the reduction in bus operators, as we mentioned earlier, the reduction in force that went into effect in June as a result of the reduced service hours. You will see a full org chart on page 16 of your packet, which shows each individual department and position with titles and names, except for the bus operators. We didn't have space for all of those names. But just to show what positions are in each department. And then if there's not any questions, I will hand it over to Nicole to go into the mechanics of the bus operations operating budget.
I'll have another question.
Okay.
Back on that last slide, it looks like administratively, you know, customer service, supervisors, and maintenance are all staying, you know, level for most part. Bus operators down. Is there any flexibility or reason that those other bus administration, customer service, supervisors, and maintenance seem like we have less routes, less riders, maybe wouldn't have as many in the maintenance department, or we just need to preserve those positions looking forward to a restoration of ridership?
So, I mean, we have discussed a non-operator reduction in force. I mean, obviously, trying to be as financially responsible as possible in relation to COVID and the fact that we have dropped service levels. And so we have done a deep dive into those administrative positions. You are absolutely correct that if service levels start to increase, we're going to be responsible for the job duties that are associated with those increased service levels. And so where we might have an FTE existing but not filled, we would keep it vacant until we have a need for that. So you'll see, like, we have a customer service manager position that has been vacant for quite a while, and we've just now resurrected that position to post. Our fleet manager position has been vacant for quite a while because we didn't need that level of supervisory support. So although some of the FTEs exist, some of those positions are vacant today.
That was going to be my question as well. Is, you know, I think it's important to look at an even or a relative type of reduction. So if you're cutting bus drivers, to me, you may not need as much administration, customer service, and then maintenance. Doesn't mean, like you said, doesn't mean you eliminate the actual FTE, but you keep the position vacant for bottom line savings.
Absolutely. And in full transparency, we were kind of waiting to see the budget that UNT brought to the table for their contract service, because that really drives the number of operators that we have and some of the administrative overhead that we have. I mean, if we're operating full UNT service, we get a whole lot more calls to customer service, for example. We need more road supervisors out there. And so we just finalized that agreement, and they were able to capture some CARES Act funding, which increased their reduced budget. And so in full transparency, we were waiting to kind of see where they netted out before we really addressed to see what type of administrative staffing levels we needed to support the service that we have on the road today.
Okay, thank you. God, excuse me.
So if there are no further questions, we can proceed into how the bus operations budget is built.
All righty.
So one more, Brandy. Great, thank you. So these are all of the departmental codes that account for the NTMC budget. And so as Marissa mentioned earlier, the NTMC budget is really what I like to say, it's all about the people. So it's gonna be your salary, your wages, your benefits, your training, uniforms, so any cost related to personnel. And so as you can see from this breakdown here, we break down service and the budget by service type so that we can pull direct costs out. And then that's utilized through our cost allocation model to then bill, for example, like our contract services like UNT, Frisco, for example. I will make a note that on contract services, you will see account 702 for NCTC service. And I did just want to let the board know that NCTC's contract does expire at the end of this month, and they have opted not to renew because 95% of their classes for the fall semester will be held online. But they do intend for us to meet back up in the September-October timeframe to see what service levels might look like for the spring semester. And if they are still needing transportation services at that time, then we would regroup and renegotiate a contract based on DCTA's cost allocation model and administrative overhead policy. So that is
Just-
one.
I was gonna say, just to clarify, that NCTC contract is between NCTC and DCTA,
Correct.
and then NCTC provides the service.
Correct. But there is in the FY20 budget and even in the FY21 budget, you will see that there is an account code specifically for NCTC service. And so I did want to make the board aware that we will probably come back with a budget adjustment to kind of zero out the first few months of service for NCTC. And then we might come back with another budget adjustment to reflect the new contract. So you will notate some changes in that one departmental code.
And what is the revenue that's generated off the contract with NTMC?
With NCTC?
NCTC, excuse me, I mispronounced that.
I do not have that readily available. I can get it for you. We charge them an hourly, like a baked hourly rate for service. And so we bill them for the actual service hours that they accrue plus the full cost of fuel.
But to clarify, when she says we, she's actually referring to DCTA. The DCTA collects the revenues and DCTA does the charging.
Correct. It's DCTA's account and NTMC provides the service. Mm-hmm. But I can get that for you.
Okay, thank you.
And so yes, as you can imagine during this budget cycle, as with any government agency, trying to create a budget for FY21 right now is very much a moving target. So we made some assumptions about service as we were creating the budget going into FY21. And since then already some of DCTA's customers have changed or pivoted their plan going into early FY21. And so as Nicole mentioned, we will definitely have some budget revisions as we go throughout the year to kind of true up what our new expectations will be.
And we just pulled the budgeted NCTC revenue, and it's at about $280,000.
Thank you.
If you'll go to the next slide, The next slide is just a glossary of terms. As we talk about building out the budget, we're going to be talking about a lot of different service types, and then service hours and service miles. And so you'll see here, NTMC operates basically our fixed route service and our demand response service. So the fixed route service is going to be like our Connect service that you'll find at Denton and Louisville. Demand response is our access service, or any like the Louisville Lakeway Zone. And then a directly operated service just means that it's NTMC employees who are operating the service. And so we just wanted to provide you with that glossary of terms. And if you'll go to the next slide, these are really the terms that we're going to be talking about as we do a deep dive into the building of the bus operations budget. Those top three terms, the revenue hours, revenue miles, and deadhead, those are the individual components that drive service hours and miles. And so you'll see down at the bottom, the service hours and the service miles. Those are the comprehensive components that we use to determine the total cost of service. And so just so that you're aware, the revenue hours are the hours that a bus is in revenue service, meaning that it's on its way to pick up people, it's running an existing route. The revenue miles are the miles associated with that portion of service. And deadhead are the miles and the hours where, like for example, from our bus O&M facility to the beginning of a route, or the end of a route to our bus operations facility, or if we have to move a bus from one location to another, but it's not in revenue service. So your service hours and your service miles are based on that comprehensive time. So deadhead plus revenue. If you will go to the next slide, this is how we determine average wages and benefits. And this calculation is important because your average wages and benefits plus your fuel cost is what determines service cost. And so you'll see that we'll take that service cost and we'll multiply it by the service hours. And that is the calculation that's then used to determine the total cost of service. So first we do a service hours detail, and we identify what those service hours are going to be. In the FY21 budget, the fixed route service hours are based on the COVID-19 service levels, and so that's why you will see a decrease in service hours. The demand response hours are estimated differently, so they're estimated on actuals from all of FY19 and then the portion of FY20 that we have available when we put together the FY21 projections. And then that estimation is then estimated out to determine what's budgeted for FY21. We then look at our service hours and convert those to pay hours. So I mentioned on the slide before, the service hours are the hours where the bus is actually in service picking up passengers. We allocate 7% to each service hour to account for what we call pre-trip and post-trip duties. So when an operator shows up to the bus O&M, they check in, they check their vehicle, they get their vehicle ready for service, and then they're heading to their route. And so that would be considered like your pre-trip portion, and then post-trip after they drop the last person off or stop at the last bus stop. They have kind of post-trip responsibilities as well. And so one service hour is actually a service hour plus 7%. Then we look at the average wage rate, and I think it's important to note here that wage rates are based on our collective bargaining agreement. So that is not a wage rate that we reset every year. Our current CBA expires March 31st of next year. And so we will be bargaining on those rates at that point in time, but the existing pay rates are based on that CBA. And the average wage rate is recalculated for each fiscal year. So we utilize that CBA to recalculate that average wage rate. And then we look at the total benefit costs, and that's really based on 3 factors. So the first would be the current billed actuals. Then we look at any increase in premiums, and then we look at a weighted average for open positions. And we typically budget, and Marissa, correct me if I'm wrong, but a 15% increase in benefits by the provider. So if you'll go to the next slide.
Let me clarify that. You said
Sure.
you're estimating a 15% increase in benefits, or you're talking about benefit cost?
Benefit cost.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, the premium amount.
On the next slide, it walks you through individual calculations that we use specific to operator wages and benefits. So the salary and wages obviously is the pay hours plus the average wage rate. Overtime is based on your salary and wages times 10%. The paid time off is your service hours times 8.9%. And the way that we determine that is by looking at your max PTO exposure. And so for FY21, that was a little over $190,000. And so we budgeted $188,000, which is a really conservative budgetary number. But we take our annual PTO, our annual PTO hours and divide our service hours, and that's how we get that 8.9%. And so we take that times the average wage rate. And that just covers our exposure, that if all of our operators were to take all of their PTO, that we would be financially covered. And then from a benefits, we allocate the total cost of benefits just based on service hours. So if you'll go to the next slide, this is showing route by service hours. So the table on the left-hand side are all of the routes that NTMC operators run. And the service hours, again, are calculated by revenue hours plus the deadhead miles. That's the total comprehensive trip. On the right-hand side, we have pulled out kind of some of the major FY21 budget takeaways. As I mentioned before, you'll see that fixed route compared to FY20 is down 40%, and that's reflective of those pre-COVID service hours that were budgeted in FY20. And so just to reiterate, that is, we are running about 40 to 60 minute headways, more on the 60-minute side. And then you'll see compared to FY20, access service is down 20% compared to the FY19 actuals, which is how FY20 was budgeted. And again, that assumes the ongoing impact of COVID. A lot of those access trips are used for medical or essential trips. And so that's why the decrease there is less than the decrease in our fixed route connect service. But as you'll see, we're looking at a total of a little bit more than 112,000 service hours. So if you'll go to the next slide, this is an overview of expenses that you'll see in the budget. So when we first started the presentation, we talked a lot about those different department codes, and that this was the NTMC budget is really personnel based. And so this is just a breakdown of the existing expenses that you'll see within each one of those line items. If you'll go to the next slide, this calls out the major changes in the FY21 budget compared to the FY20 budget. And so if you'll look over on the right-hand side, this is where we've called out some of those major differences and why you'll see a variation in the dollar amount. On wages and benefits, again, the CBA dictates the average rate for operators. And so there is an increase to that rate every single year. And then again, as we had mentioned, we assume a 15% increase in the cost of benefit premiums. On outsourced service and charges, you will see an increase due to the full year of the GM contract, as well as we increased the amount that we budgeted for uniforms because we did not budget enough in the FY20 budget and had to make a budget adjustment. So we just accounted for that increase within the FY21 budget. In materials and supplies, you'll see a very small increase, and that's really due to some office supplies and printing. Last year, we did not budget any major print jobs for NTMC, and so DCTA took on the cost of printing copies of the collective bargaining agreement or the operator handbook or the non-operator handbook, and so we've just budgeted those items in the materials and supplies category. In insurance, you'll see a decrease of $7,000 due to workers' compensation insurance. And in employee development, you'll see a decrease of $22,000. And that goes back to what Marissa was saying, that overall NTMC and DCTA had a reduction in their registrations, training, and travel. So that is why you'll see that decrease there. And if we move to the next slide, I'll go ahead and hand it back over to Marissa.
Sure. And on this this next slide, this just shows the overall summarized expenses for the FY21 budget for NTMC, and then the transfer in of funding from DCTA, showing a change in net position to be neutral, and that is always how the monthly financial statements will look, and how the budget is prepared, since NTMC currently exists only to provide service for DCTA, and DCTA provides all of the funding for NTMC. If there are increases in operating expenses, DCTA then increases the transfer in. If there's decreases in operating expenses, that's a reduction in that transfer in from DCTA. That is, on the next slide, that is essentially our full budget for NTMC and the components that are related to the NTMC personnel. Are there any additional questions that we can answer for y'all today?
I have one. If you go back to the previous slide that kind of gave the summary. Yes, ma'am. What I understand is in regards to salary, wages, and benefits, we have budgeted for a certain number of positions, bus drivers and management. What I heard you say is, though, that we have a number of positions we're going to leave vacant right now, even though they're budgeted, they will not be filled. And I saw a chart earlier, maybe it was in the packet that y'all sent us. It was kind of like an organizational chart, and it showed a number of positions that were vacant. So my question is, even though this is our budget of $7.2 million, what do we think it's really going to be when we leave all these positions vacant?
I would say that we would have a clearer idea next month. And the reason I say that is when we have to prepare the FY21 budget, that has to be prepared and finalized in early May. Obviously, we were just on the beginning kind of chapters of COVID, and we didn't really know what service levels were going to be like. So we had to make some adjustments. And so I think that next month we will have a much clearer idea, now that the UNT piece has been finalized, as to how that's going to impact our operator numbers as well as our administrative numbers. And so I would feel uncomfortable sharing a number with you right now when we really just in the last week and a half started to have conversations with NTMC management about the required service levels.
Okay. So today we're having a budget workshop, but as far as approving the budget, that would be scheduled for the next meeting.
That's in September.
September.
Yes.
Okay.
So the DCTA the DCTA board will hold a public hearing at its August meeting. That includes the funding for the NTMC budget as well, based on the service that the DCTA is currently requesting. And then assuming that if there are changes after that meeting, those will be incorporated into the NTMC budget. And then the DCTA board will be asked to approve the DCTA budget in September, and the NTMC board will be asked to approve the NTMC budget at that time as well.
Okay, thank you.
See meeting in September.
Chair Hayes, this is Sarah Hensley. I'd like to see if it's a possibility to do two things, because I have to be off this call at 10:05. But one is on item D, to take the vision and mission statement, and I recommend that we do that jointly with the DCTA board. But take item number E out of a line to take the vote, because I don't want to leave the call and not have that happen for the contract.
All righty. I think as a practical matter, were there any other questions in regards to the budget workshop, or have we concluded that item?
Just real quickly, if I just want to understand the process. This staff organizes and proposes a budget, or puts that all together in May. In June, that goes before DCTA, which happened after our last joint meeting. Is that correct?
It happened before. So it was on June 18th, DCTA staff took the comprehensive FY21 proposed budget to the DCTA Board of Directors.
And was there a lot of adjustment, or did DCTA pretty much accept what staff presented at that time?
There were questions and clarifications that were asked of DCTA staff that DCTA is following up. Actually, tomorrow at the DCTA board meeting, we will be following up on some of the questions. But as a whole, the budget was accepted as is. Now, that does not mean that the DCTA board can't come back and ask for adjustments during the meeting tomorrow. But DCTA staff did not leave that DCTA workshop with the direction to modify expenses.
Okay, so and now we're seeing what they saw, and then in August it will go public, and anything that comes out of that will be adjusted, and then in September both DCTA and our board will approve a final budget.
That is correct.
And then also, let me get some clarification kind of based on your question, Dawn, either from Marissa or Joe. Who needs to approve the NTMC budget first, DCTA or NTMC?
DCTA, because DCTA issues the budget.
Okay,
And
so
DCTA provides the funding.
so what we will need to do is for the September NTMC board meeting, we will need to reschedule it so that it occurs after the DCTA meeting.
That is correct.
So if we'll send out, well, Brandy will send out some dates. We'll go ahead and get that on your calendar. But if a Friday would work, we could do it the day after the DCTA board meeting. So we'll send out some dates and times and see what works best for the board members.
All right. I think that concludes then the budget workshop. We're going to move then to item 2E, authorize the NTMC president to extend the general manager contract through December 2020.
And I'm going to be covering this for Christina so that she has little voice left, and we're trying to get her through the rest of the day. On page 17 of your packet, you will find the original agreement for transportation system general manager. And then on page 27, you'll find the job description for the GM. As you are aware, RJ Garza has been our interim contract GM for NTMC. And I'm speaking on behalf of NTMC at this time. And we have had a great collaborative relationship with RJ and seeing the improvements that he has been making. In working with DCTA staff, we did make the recommendation that DCTA include the contract rate for a GM within the FY21 projection. So the numbers that we just presented through the budget workshop include the GM at the contract rate. At this time, NTMC leadership is recommending the extension of the existing contract through December 31st, 2020. So that's an additional 3 months of contract, which equates to $42,900. NTMC leadership and working with DCTA leadership feels like this extension is appropriate for continuity, but also because DCTA is conducting a transformation initiative, and the results of that and the recommendations from that initiative should be complete and presented to the DCTA board by the end of the year. So with that, we would request that the NTMC board authorize the NTMC president to manager contract through December 2020.
Thank
Move
you.
approval.
I have a motion and a second from Don. The proposed contract, would it essentially be the same wording as we have before of the
Yes, sir.
existing contract we're looking at right now?
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you. Is there any further discussion on this item to extend the contract of the general manager through December 2020? Not seeing any, then I'll call the vote.
Richard, in your vote, could you go ahead and authorize the president to execute that amendment also, so we don't have to bring it back?
Okay. So the motion is to authorize the NTMC president to extend and enter into a contract that will extend the services of the general manager through December 2020. Everyone understand the motion?
Yes.
Okay, all in favor, if you will indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Don, couldn't hear you.
I said it with Sarah, so we.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry,
All
Don.
right. Thank you. All
I,
right.
apo-
The
I
motion-
apologize. Okay, go
The
ahead.
motion passes. Thank you.
I apologize. I have to get off. I just was recommending that perhaps since we had the discussion previously that the NTMC vision and mission statement might be better served us all if we were able to have a joint meeting with DCTA and discuss that after the joint meeting that occurred last month. That's just a recommendation for me, and it's certainly, just my thoughts.
I concur wholeheartedly.
Yeah, I think those are very good thoughts. I think DCTA needs to complete their analysis and recommendations. That then would move us to item 3 on the agenda of the next board meeting. All right, excuse me, we didn't have the general manager report.
And I'm going to have to get off, and I really apologize, but thank you so much to staff and to everybody.
Thank you,
Hope
Sarah.
Thank you, Sarah.
Hope you feel better, Christina.
Thank you.
Alrighty, bye-bye.
All right, we're on that part of the agenda for the report of the general manager.
Good morning, Vice Chair Hayes, and also the board members. For the record, I'm the RJ Garza. I'm the interim general manager. I appreciate the extension approval. First of all, I'd like to.
Let me say this, RJ. The board members believe you're doing a wonderful job.
I really appreciate it, and we certainly want to do the best job that we possibly can. Like I said previously, we've got to you get all the right pull in place. You've got.
Hey, RJ, this is Joe. Let me interrupt you for a second. Richard, did we lose our quorum? I'm counting here. Are we down to 2?
Yes.
Yes, I see this as strictly as informational. It's not an action item.
Okay, is this the only informational item? Let me just, yep. Okay.
There's no more action.
All right, just making sure.
Thank you, Joe.
And certainly we appreciate the extension, and we'll do the best job that we possibly can. I love it here. I like it. We have great staff, and I'm here to help develop them best I can. I wanted also just to give a special recognition, if I can, to one of our mobility service representatives. It was brought to my attention by one of the shift supervisors, a coworker of his, and I'm just going to speak or read what she provided to me. And she just wanted to give kudos to Mr. George Watson. He's a mobility service representative for his servant mindset. On June 18th, we had a passenger who was not allowed to board the train as he had no shoes. So George literally gave him the shoes off his feet so the young man could continue his trip. So I just really want to thank Mr. Watson for his servant mindset, and he does great public service at the same time, providing customer service to all our clients. And I just wanted to give him a special thanks and recognition on that. I also want to thank and recognize the operators for, during these hard times, excuse me. During these tough times right now, we're asking the drivers to wear the mask for on duty, and they've done so, and I really appreciate them doing that. And also that it's not just for us or DCTA or NTMC or the public. It's really for their safety, and so I really appreciate them making the effort and doing it for their safety as well. And also it helps to assure that the passengers are at the same time are doing the same. And the drivers have been passing out when required, most passengers have been wearing masks already, but drivers do have readily available extra masks in case a passenger needs one. So I do want to send thank yous to them. Next, I'd like to go ahead and discuss a little bit about the monthly joint management meeting that we've been having with DCTA officials and NTMC to discuss and review certain topics. Just to let you know, we have some good conversations, topics that some of the topics and concerns are updates on COVID-19. As mentioned earlier, the staffing levels of service is discussed, maintenance trainings, updates and status, DDTC operations and security, passenger complaints, and other business. We're also working on establishing key performance indicators for the board review, and we're hoping to have that soon by next month. So we'll be providing some KPIs for your review. Also, I'm going to be asking to include fare collection process. So I understand that there needs some clarification, some direction from management to the operators to know and understand how to deal with passengers that may not have the exact fare or no fare. And so I'd like to review that and provide some clear direction for the operators. On fixed route, just to give you a brief, I know you've asked about the overall for the year and how COVID has impacted our service levels, but I do want to mention that from right now to July, in comparison to the same number of days during the week of last month, we are seeing an increase in ridership by 3.5%. Also, in comparison to the previous month in May, we're seeing a 14.1% increase in fixed route service during the week. We're also DTCA will be submitting an update of the fixed route schedules for a new bid that will commence August 24th based on UNT request of service requirements. We're also going to be including we're having discussions about and finalizing and providing a vacation bid for all drivers so they could also pick a vacation up through the end of January if they would like to choose a vacation. Also, I just wanted to mention that HTG has provided a fleet facilities consultant and who has been providing training, support, direction, skills development, and this person will be providing recommendations for improvements as required, and also be providing a list of processes, SOPs, to help assure that the procedures are in place to meet DOT and federal regulations. Also be evaluating the equipment needs assessment and making recommendations for DCTA. And so I'm really glad that the DCTA was in favor of bringing on this person, because it has helped me and the maintenance staff extensively. And that's basically all I have for today, unless anybody has any questions.
I have one. Mr. Garza, I think I heard you say that ridership in May was up 14% over April.
No, a ridership this month,
Okay.
July, the current month, has been up in comparison to the same number of days in May, up by 3.1%.
All right. And what is when you say 14%, what does that translate into actual number of riders?
Basically, I don't have it in front of me, but basically, right now when I reviewed that, it was approximately 13 days, I believe, weekdays, and it was a little over 8,000 riders in comparison to about 6,900 in May. So it is a considerable amount. Those are the exact numbers, but I can provide those to you later.
Oh, that's close enough for government work.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Right. Any other questions of the general manager?
Not a question, but just, I really appreciate you sharing that incident that you did at the beginning about what the driver did. That humanizes, you know, we look at numbers and buses and routes and everything, but these are real people, and I appreciate you sharing that.
Oh, thank you.
You?
And I just want to share one piece of information. I don't think RJ mentioned it, but you know, there with COVID going on, we talk with many different transit agencies, and a lot of their frontline workers and operators have been negatively impacted in regarding like having a positive test result. And to date, I assume it's still true. It was yesterday, but within bus operations, we have had 0 positive COVID cases. That's not to say we haven't had some suspected or close calls where we've had to kind of start implementing the procedure that we have set up and in place. But I know that there are transit agencies across the country that are dealing with some of their operators getting sick and their maintenance workers. But our operators are so far are healthy, and they're taking all the precautions, not only at the office, but I think RJ and his team have been encouraging the operators and other frontline workers to also take precautions whenever they're not at work. That way they can continue to work and stay healthy and safe. So I feel like that is a very important point to share.
And Christina, if I could add, and DCTA's bus operation staff, we are actually the only transit agency in the state of Texas that has not had a positive case. So that's pretty big. And I would say that, I mean, precautionary measures, I think, have been a brainchild between DCTA and NTMC collaboratively. But I really take my hat off to RJ and his team for implementing some very innovative solutions to prevent the spread of COVID. And RJ and his team have been great partners from a DCTA and an NTMC perspective. And without that hard work and dedication, I don't think that we would be able to say that we're the only transit agency in the state of Texas that has not had a positive case.
That's fantastic. That's great news, and congratulations to you, Mr. Garza. That's great.
Thank you very much.
All righty. Note that the next meeting is going to be August 26th. It's our September date that will slide, that we'll receive items. You'll see number 4 is future agenda items. We had a request from the email I read earlier from Mr. Owens, and I see the general manager is addressing that very same point. So I anticipate that will be dealt with and a recommendation made thereon, not only to us, but I would think to the DCTA on what the policy is going to be. Okay, if there's nothing else, then I will adjourn the meeting. There's no objection. There being no objection, the meeting's adjourned. Thank you, and everyone stay safe.
Thank you, Richard and Don. We appreciate you. Thank you, Jay.
Thank you.